Keep on walking, keep on talking, walking. President and Senior Lecturer of Repairs of the Breach, and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And we are gathering from all around the nation and in the nation's capital today to raise an important issue. I had planned to be there this morning. I was called to do the eulogy for a young man who was shot to death by the police in Virginia Beach under questionable circumstances. And as we were trying to make it there, the traffic became so intense that it kept us from being there on time. But today we come because we as clergy, pastors, imams, rabbis, people from the Hindu community and the Muslim community are challenging the immorality of the filibuster. We can no longer have an impoverished democracy because a minority group of senators want to shut down open debate and shut down bringing issues to the floor to address the critical issues that face us as a people in this nation. We have 140 million plus people now that are in poverty and low wealth in this nation. We have 62 million people that make less than $17 an hour in this nation. We have over 80 million people who make who either are uninsured or underinsured in this nation. We have serious issues to address in terms of coming out of this pandemic, rebuilding from the bottom up and building forward greater in this nation. And we cannot have a system that actually is rooted in an ugly history. Now, many times when people talk about the filibuster, they talk about how it has been used to block civil rights legislation, and they frame it in a racist, as a form of systemic racism. And that's true, but it is more than that. And it's high time that we let the public know it's more than that. Now, yes, in the 1800s, the filibuster was used to stop every piece of anti-slavery legislation, every piece of anti-slavery legislation. In 1937, there was a vicious lynching in Duck Hill, Mississippi, where people's bodies were literally mutilated and burned. The House of Representatives, to honor, to deal with this issue and to deal with the horror of it, they passed an anti-lynching bill in 1837. But the senators and the white Southern members launched a tenacious filibuster to prevent the anti-lynching bill from reaching the floor for a vote. When it came to the New Deal, a lot of the legislation that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt tried to put forward, some historians say that he had to back away from that anti-lynching bill because of the filibuster in order to allow some other pieces of legislation to go forward. What a horrendous trade-off that was forced by those who would engage in filibustering. We know in 1918, however, it wasn't just Black people. In 1918, Southern conservatives in the Senate blocked women's suffrage for a long time by a Senate filibuster. They didn't want the 19th Amendment. So the filibuster has been the antithesis to women in this country moving forward. We know that 5 times between 1942 and 1949, the House passed bills that sought to ban poll taxes 5 times. And 5 times senators filibustered and allowed poll tax to stay on the record. We know that Strom Thurmond and Dick Russell used the filibuster to try to weaken the 1957 Civil Rights Act. And we also know, however, that when we look past the post-war decades, the Senate used the filibuster and other procedural tricks, not just the filibuster, to block labor policies from reaching the floor and policies about labor unions from reaching the floor. We know that the filibuster was used. The party failed at labor's most important goal, and that was the repeal of the Taft-Hartley Right to Work Act, because a bipartisan conservative filibuster in the U.S. Senate was employed. In 1974, a 5-year effort to pass a bill to create an independent consumer protection agency fell victim to the filibuster. So yes, it's been used to undermine things that would benefit African Americans, but also with things that would benefit all Americans. The filibuster has been used. We know in 1972, the filibuster was used to block legislation to give the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission the power to move against job discrimination. For months, they blocked it. We know in 2014, a Republican filibuster successfully barred the Protect Women's Health from Corporate Interference Act, literally blocked it, which was intended to remedy the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling that employers could refuse to include contraceptives for women in their insurance plan. The filibuster the filibuster has been used to block laws that would stem voter suppression. It's been used in some ways, a form of it has been used to block any real votes on things like living wages. And what it does is the filibuster is dangerous to our democracy. It undermines the democracy because the ultimate goal of the filibuster, it is a centerpiece of an arcane obstructionist type rules in the United States that bars the body from the deliberative role that was envisioned by the founders. It has been used to stall presidential appointments, federal judicial appointments, laws addressing unemployment benefits in national economic emergency times. It's been used to block environmental protection measures, global climate measures. It's been used to even block laws that would require disclosure of political contributions in a country where we have such a flood of dark money. The current filibuster rule discourages public debate, and the way they do it now is worse than even in the past. Because in the past, at least you had to go to the floor and keep the filibuster up. Today, if you simply say you don't have the 60 votes, there's not even a filibuster debate. And so people never really see. What the filibuster does is it blocks people from seeing, it blocks those senators' constituents from seeing where they really are. And at the end of the day, the filibuster is immoral. It does not provide the freedom and the liberty that should be in a democracy. It causes us to have an impoverished democracy. It allows injustice to flourish. And anything that allows injustice to flourish and inequality to flourish is not in line with our deepest moral values constitutionally, which call us to establish justice, and not in line with our deepest moral values religiously, that calls us to care for the least of these and to lift from the bottom and to lift up those. There's a great scripture in the Bible, in Isaiah 10, that says, woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor of their rights. The filibuster, more often than not, has been used to rob the poor, rob African Americans, rob women, rob workers of their rights. And it is not right. And we as a national body of clergy and pastors and religious persons from all different faiths, representing tens and tens of thousands of people today in Washington, D.C. and around the country, call for the ending of the filibuster. It is time for the Senate to have honest, open, full debate on the issues of our day. We don't need any more to have living wages blocked and health care to be blocked and infrastructure that lifts from the bottom up to be blocked and money for public education to be blocked and those things that would make this democracy better. This is not about left or right. It is not about conservative versus liberal. It is about right versus wrong. And so today we commit to create holy trouble. We're going to trouble the walls and trouble the Senate. We're going to trouble the senators. We're going to call them. We're going to organize voters. We're going to push people out because it is time to stop the filibuster. Lastly, the filibuster by name. One language says it really means to talk to death. And another language, the filibuster, means to rob. Well, it's time to stop talking to death in ways that block us from having the real discussions we need to be having about justice in this society. And we cannot allow the robbery to go on anymore. No longer can a minority of senators block those things that would lift more than 140 million people out of poverty and low wealth. That is not the American way. It is not the intentions of this democracy. And we as people of faith and religious leaders are calling it out It is immoral, it is sinful, and it is wrong, and it must stop. I turn the program now back over to those that are in DC, and then you'll hear from other great leaders from around the country who are standing together in this endeavor. Go on anymore. No longer can a minority of and we as people of faith and religious mother
Theoharis. I'm the director of the Cairo Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice, and the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And it's an honor to be here, as Reverend Barber said, in Washington, D.C., in the nation's capital, making holy trouble. We want to hear first a note of welcome from Reverend Dr. Amy Butler, from interim senior pastor of this church that we're gathered in front of, National City Christian Church here in Washington, D.C., who's going to welcome us to this space, welcome us to this city where we're going to keep on making this holy trouble, keep on defending our democracy, keep on speaking out against the filibuster and voting for voting rights and for health care and for living wages and for everything that everybody in this society needs to thrive. So Reverend Dr. Amy Butler, thank you so much for welcoming us here and now welcome us even more to the program.
Thanks. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome especially to the steps of National City Christian Church on this Easter Monday. As people of faith and good conscience, we are gathered here to do the critical and important work of justice in our communities. It is a mandate of our faith and of our conscience, and we are delighted to be here causing holy trouble and joining together to call for justice in our country. You are welcome in this holy place. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much, and we have a couple of other faith leaders that are going to help welcome us here, speak to the program here, and then we will, as a diverse grouping of people from across Washington D.C. and other parts of the country, we will read a statement also about a statement of conscience that we are called to make today, and we're asking everybody that's joining us online as well to also send this statement in to our senators, because they have to hear this moral cry for holy disruption and holy justice. But before we get to that, a pastor, a reverend who has done a lot of holy troublemaking here in the city and all across the country, I want to introduce Reverend Graylin Hagler to speak with us today.
Yay.
Thank you, Reverend Liz. First thing I want to do is for us to just pause for one moment, because Liz Davis, who was president of the Washington Teachers Union, was killed last night in an automobile accident. And she was one of those dynamic leaders that also was very supportive of the Poor People's Campaign, locally as well as nationally. If we could just join in that moment of silence for a moment. Amen. And I lift up the spirit of Liz, because Liz was someone who was truly concerned about democracy. Democracy taking place here in Washington, D.C., as well as democracy across the country. And as I preached yesterday in terms of Resurrection Sunday, it was not lost on me that it was the anniversary of the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Something that we didn't hear a lot about yesterday. But the fact is that life was a life that was lived trying to open up democracy, trying to open up citizen participation, trying to open up the truth. And so what we're here today about is standing up as people of goodwill, people of conscience, and people of faith, saying that we are called to enlarge democracy, and this tactic of the filibuster basically tries to silence democracy. And so we're not interested in being silenced, but we're interested in having the most important, vital, and economic and sociological and ecological issues debated, discussed in our time, and lifted up to paramount importance. So we're not about shrinkage of democracy, but we're about its enlargement, its increase, that voices might be heard, that agendas might be addressed. I was speaking to Reverend Barber, and I was reminding him that not only was the filibuster used to basically protect pro-slavery forces in this country, but resolution after resolution was passed in the U.S. Congress before the Civil War that basically outlawed any representative from mentioning slavery whatsoever in the Congress of the United States, that they could be censored. And so one of the things that we're battling against is that continued spirit of fascism. Fascism that does not want to be held accountable. Fascism that does not want people to participate in the political process. Fascism that does not want to have us debate the kinds of issues that are important for life, for liberty, and for hope. So today we stand. Immoral filibuster cannot block democracy. And all of us, we agree on that. Amen.
All right. Thank you. Indeed, we cannot filibuster democracy. And so we're here as people of faith, people of conscience from across this city and across this country, making sure that our voices are heard as we stand for justice, as we stand for voting rights, as we stand for living wages, and as we call on our senators to do the right thing, to stop blocking, to stop passing policies, as Reverend Barber said, that oppress the poor. The leaders that are gathered here represent thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people across this country. And the next speaker I want to bring up, Jim Winkler, is the President and Secretary General of the National Council of Churches in Christ, representing Christians all over this country, all over this land, who say we need justice now. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Reverend Liz, and thank you to the Poor People's Campaign for bringing us together. You know, the United States Senate is free to set its own rules, but we who vote for the senators insist the Senate must not let those rules stop them from doing our work. The filibuster is one of those old rules that keeps the Senate from getting its job done. The filibuster was long used by avowed racists who wielded it as a weapon over and over again to kill any progress to secure voting rights and civil rights for people of color in this nation. The filibuster is a symbol and tool of white supremacy. It must never again be used to block even the opening of debate on a bill. It must never again be used to obstruct the final vote on the Senate floor. The filibuster must never again be used as a threat in order to kill legislation. It is a cowardly tactic designed to forestall progress for the good of the nation. Limiting debate to a reasonable period is common sense. We elect our senators to exercise common sense. We elect our senators to play a constructive role in addressing the needs of our people and of our nation. The filibuster is used to expressly stop fair consideration of critical legislation. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say the Senate needs 60 votes in order to advance major legislation. I'm all in favor of bipartisanship, and I want the Senate to craft rules that will further such efforts, but maintaining an anti-democratic filibuster is not the means to such ends. There are other ways to foster bipartisanship. For example, let's reduce the power of money in Senate races and in all political campaigns. There's no reason rich people and corporations should get to spend whatever they want. If our senators aren't spending an inordinate amount of time raising money for their campaigns, they should have more time to sit down together and with us to address the issues of the day. Today, the filibuster is part of a toxic stew that is poisoning our public life. We don't just need to address the anti-democratic nature of the filibuster, which has long permitted the most reactionary forces in our society to perpetuate racism, slavery, and poverty. We have to go further and come up with creative ways to modernize the Senate. Perhaps, for example, it should be enlarged so that millions and millions of Americans who are underrepresented in the Senate have their voice heard and their votes counted. And we need to find ways that foster free and healthy and fair debate without permitting hate speech and conspiracy mongering to have outsized voices. Let's deal forthrightly with hate speech in politics and on the internet, in television and radio. Once your speech and your Twitter and your broadcasts result in the storming of the Capitol or in hate crimes or in gun violence, then you must face justice. There must be consequences. The House of Representatives has already passed important legislation to empower and strengthen protections for workers, expand access to voting rights and bolster our democracy, protect the rights of LGBTQ people, hold law enforcement accountable in the wake of systemic racism, enact common sense gun violence prevention legislation, and reform our immigration system. House consideration of legislation to protect our environment and raise the minimum wage is anticipated soon. This legislation is going to make its way to the Senate. The Senate must do its job and stop using outmoded rules to hold up progress.
That's right.
Thank you.
All right. Amen. Indeed, we must stop filibustering democracy. And we're here in Washington, D.C., making sure that our voices are heard. We're going to raise our voices now. We're going to read this statement, or part of it, that we're also asking folks to send to your senators. And so I'm going to ask everyone to take out their statement. We're going to read this out loud in unison and invite people all across the country to join us in this. We want to make sure our voices are heard because we have to call this nation, call these senators to conscience. And so we're going to say, in the midst of this holy season, we are interfaith leaders and people of moral conscience issue forth this call to conscience to the U.S. Senate. We come together as a national moral fusion movement, calling on the nation to join us in the days, weeks, and months to come in this movement to heal the nation. As regressive forces try to split us apart, we come together as people and communities directly impacted by the evils of a society that Dr. King diagnosed over 50 years ago as approaching spiritual death. Evils such as voter suppression, economic exploitation, lack of health care, ecological devastation, and a war-based economy. Evils that together we can challenge and together we can overcome. We recognize that our vote, our wages, our health care, our infrastructure, and our voice are being blocked by an immoral filibuster. And we are not the first generation to have fundamental human rights fall victim to this Jim Crow relic used by reactionary forces through history. The filibuster has been used to block civil rights, labor rights, voting rights, living wages, health care access, especially for the poor and low wealth, black, brown, white, Asian, and indigenous people. The filibuster continues to facilitate idolatrous policy platforms about who deserves to thrive and who does not. The filibuster is being used to block our very democracy, and we join together to say, don't filibuster democracy. Don't filibuster democracy. Don't filibuster democracy.
Don't do it.
All right. I invite everybody to read the full statement on the website and to send it to our senators, because this, as people of conscience, is the message that we have to this nation. As we said in the statement, as Reverend Hagler mentioned before, yesterday was the anniversary not just of the death of Dr. King, but also of his speech coming out against the triple evils of militarism, economic exploitation, and racism. And he said in that speech that he came because his conscience leaves me no other choice. That we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin to shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. A true revolution of values will cause us soon to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies. And that is why we're here today. We're questioning the fairness and the justice of the filibuster, the fairness and the justness of being able to deny voting rights and living wages and expanded health care to people in a nation when the vast majority of people support these things, when we say we're a nation that is built to pursue happiness and to defend this democracy and to give everybody a chance to thrive. And so we indeed also call this nation in this moment, in this holy season, that we must make holy disruption, holy trouble, and we must make sure that everybody across this country has the right to live, has the right to thrive, has the right to be able to express their vote and be a part of this democracy. Yes. And that we cannot do that with the filibuster intact. And so we, like people before us, have had to come together and stand out and stand up for justice. And we raise this moral cry, this moral voice with people of faith and conscience all across this country, because we know that we must move forward together and not one step back. Amen. So we're going to pass it back to the folks that are tuning in from online, but before we do that, we're going to say, don't filibuster democracy. Don't filibuster democracy. Don't filibuster democracy. Don't filibuster democracy. All right, thank you so much. We thank everybody for joining us, and we look forward to hearing the other faith leaders that are joining us, representing so many faith traditions across the country right now.
Thank you. That is right. Don't filibuster democracy. Don't filibuster democracy. And we are the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And we are a fusion movement here today with interfaith leaders, people of moral consciousness. And we're saying that we're not going to allow the filibuster to block our voice. We're not going to allow it to block our vote. We're not going to allow it to block living wages or any other moral policies that we need in this country to heal this nation. So without further ado, we're going to hear from the voices across this country about what it means to be in this moment. The first leaders you're going to hear is Imam Griggs and Rose Gudiel Escobar.
Assalamu alaikum. I greet you in the Muslim greeting of peace, which is actually a supplication, a prayer for peace, which we need so much in the world today. Holy trouble is the path of the prophets, is the path of the righteous, is the path of people of conscience. And I'm so grateful to be able to experience this attempt to stop, break up this indecent attempt to deny the expression of legislation that is beneficial to historically deprived and denied populations. It is an immoral use of words. The tongue can be used for good. You can call people to democracy, or it can be used in a manner that the filibuster has been used in this country to deny rights and access for the people to their human rights and citizenship rights. Muslims are about to enter the month of Ramadan in a few days. It's a month of denial in terms of denying ourselves of eating food during the daylight hours. But it's also a time where there's a heightened consciousness about the use of the tongue. What are we using our tongues for? It can be used for good or for bad. This filibuster has historically, and as long as it exists, will continue to be used for bad, or to be used for that which is not beneficial to humanity, nor pleasing to our Lord. So the Muslim community joins with everyone in calling for an end to this indecent use of words and expression called the filibuster.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here. My name is Rose Goodale Escobar. I am one of the quad chairs of the California, the Poor People's Campaign, and also a member leader of SEIU Local 1000. We represent 96,000 state employees. And I wanted to say one of our biggest wins in our last contract was having no employee make less than $15 an hour. We know the importance, but we know that it's not enough. That in order for us as people to have a true living wage, we would have to be closer to what inflation has brought us up to like $23 an hour, and we're not even there. You know, we know that this is the moment that we can make this a reality. The same way that we made a reality of what happened in Georgia, the same way that we made a reality of how we changed our current administration to putting folks there that claim they will be there for us and will do things to support us. But we know history. We know that the history tells us that once we get to this point, we get to this third Reconstruction, which is where we're at. Those that are threatened by us poor and low-income people that flex their power and actually voted, that takes us into what the same tactics that they've used years and years and years, and that is about using the filibuster and the voter suppression. You know, here in the state of California, we are very liberal, but even here, we're starting to see that. We have two bills that have been set forth, SB 511 and SB 597, again, trying to do the same thing because they know that we have the people power to move things the way we've shown. So, as we say, we as a people need to continue to stay woke. We need to continue to hold these elected officials accountable to what they promised us. They promised us to pass laws that lift from the bottom, including voter protection laws. We know that history does not repeat itself. We repeat history if we don't learn from it and actually change the outcomes of what we the people need. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being with us today. I'm Alvin Jackson. The title they've given me is Senior Strategist to the Faith Team. It just means that I'm old, but I'm happy to serve with Reverend Casimir, Dr. Adam on the Faith Team. And the next voice will be that of one of the tri-chairs of the Wisconsin State Coordinating Committee, Moses Hernandez McGavin will speak to us. Moses?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. Just yesterday, Christians celebrated the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified, an execution reserved in ancient Rome for only the most dangerous political prisoners of the time. And we have to ask ourselves, what was Jesus's crime? What had Jesus done to be, in the eyes of the empire, so deserving of such a humiliating, public, painful, and unjust death? He was doing the most dangerous thing in the face of the empire. He was building power, a collective moral fusion movement that would rise up and challenge the powers that be. He was organizing poor fishermen and developing them into powerful leaders, because poor fishermen in ancient Rome had nothing to lose. And so we must ask, what is the crime of the poor and the dispossessed today? What is the crime that warrants such policy violence and the filibusters put forward by the empire? Is it that the poor and the dispossessed are building power and shifting the narrative? Is it that the poor and the dispossessed are developing many leaders, creating many Peters and many Reverend Dr. Kings? Is it that the poor and the dispossessed are crying for power, are fighting for rights, and are no longer accepting crumbs in the midst of abundance? We see you, senators, those who filibuster, hiding behind the wicked power of the empire, and we will remember your names, just as we remember the names of those who filibustered the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The 140 million poor and dispossessed strong will remember your ties to the empire, your wicked commitment to profit over people, and your undying commitment to unjust laws and oppressive decrees. The 99% will not forget, and neither will God. Which side are you on?
Thank you, Moses. Thank you. And my apologies, Dr. Winsler. I didn't see you in the gallery, but we welcome now Dr. Winsler Nosey, former chairman of the San Carlos Apache tribe. Dr. Winsler.
Thank you, Dante, to everyone out there listening. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to take part. You know, for over 45 years of working really hard on these changes, it's really good to see the voices being spoken across this country about healing. And for, you know, the devastation that took place over 500 years to our people has really been a life of a misunderstanding and life of struggle ever since then, and into what is the federal policies today. And to know that over 150 years ago, our leaders signed an agreement with the United States to keep the Holy Lands holy here. And now we are in battle throughout this country to maintain our holy and sacred sites. I just came off the mountain, and that's where I've been over a year and a half, praying for the Poor People's Campaign as well in this movement of healing, because as Reverend Barber says, the narrative has to change. And if it doesn't change from the perspective of the Indian people, is that, you know, we're walking a road that will diminish us all, because without the environment, there's no life. Without God's creation of all the things that he's given us, there's nothing, there's no life. And so the biggest struggle that in Indian country we have today is to maintain that the gift that God gave the world, you know, will be kept intact and for those yet to be born. And so it's a whole spiritual movement that's taken place. And then also in our prophecy, one of the things that it said was that, why do you think God led the people to this part of the country? Because there has to be healing around the world. And what we see is that as it is today, you all allowing me to be at the table, is that we have to be at the table, because the morals and integrity and the culture of the world is out of balance. And we need to bring that back into balance. And we are a big part of that, because when you see me, you see yourself of where you all came from, what your people had to endure on colonization and capitalism. Those are the problems we all have today. And us Indian people, we're just trying to stop and not be sucked into that way of life, because the religion comes from the community and comes from your family, the family that ties across this world of how the world is supposed to be spiritually. And so we're hated for that. Today, I'm hated because of protecting a holy and sacred place from the United States given to a foreign mining company, Resolution Copper. And my life is threatened today, and I have to be protected today to live every day to continue this fight. And it's because of colonization and capitalism, the very thing you all speak of the fight that we're fighting to change the narrative, to change it to the way it should be, and to redo the first chapter, because the chapter is where all the sins have created this, what we call America, to where it is today. So for today to be in this little part and have this little part of the narrative, I want to thank you, because it is the beginning. It is the new beginning. And to have us at the table is the most crucial thing, because I speak from the religious part of the prophecy, is that we have to be at the table. But if we're denied, then you all are starting from the second and third chapter. You have to start from the first. So again, I want to thank all the people and the Poor People's Campaign who's worked really hard with us on this issue. And I thank you for that. And I can continue to pray on that, because what is evil in this world comes 2-3 times stronger at us to change this way of life for the betterment of what God created. Not only us, but the Mother Earth itself that it created. So we are hated for that. And that's why it's so important that we continue to pray and keep in that spiritual road. So thank you to all of you who have heard me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nosy. Thank you, Moses. The next voices you will hear is Hari Venkatachalam, MPH and board member of Sadhana Coalition of Progressive Hindus, and Rabbi Michael Pollack from Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign and March on Harrisburg. Hari?
Hello, namaste, namaskar. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and I'm here on behalf of Sadhana Coalition of Progressive Hindus. Every voice that I've heard is so filled with passion, so filled with stories. And so I'm here to share a little bit of my story as well, especially in this time of the pandemic. I've watched so many of my friends and loved ones sink into poverty, live in fear of financial insecurity, health insecurity, because we as a nation do not have the networks to protect our citizens when the times get rough. This honestly always hurts the most vulnerable, the people of color, our Native and Indigenous brothers and sisters, our LGBTQ+ family. So I'm now here to also call on my fellow Hindus to speak up. And we call on our senators to act, not to shirk their responsibilities through inaction. We call on them to act on legislation to empower the poor of our nation, provide them health, shelter, food, everything that we deserve, just simply because we are human. And at this time, I'd like to think of a quote from the Bhagavad Gita, something that's very dear to my heart, from chapter 6, verse 32. Lord Krishna says, I regard them to be perfect yogis who see the true quality of all living beings and respond to the joys and sorrows of others as if it were their own. This is what we call paradukha dukhi, to feel and experience the joys and pains of others. And during this time, I've really felt all the pain that every single person has spoken about. So I experience your pain, I stand with you, and I'm now calling on our senators to do the same. Feel our pain, feel our joy, share in this moment, act. Namaste. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. It is so good to be with you all. 53 years ago and 11 days ago, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel stood before a convention of rabbis and said that Martin Luther King Jr. is proof that God has not forsaken the United States of America. And 10 days later, he was assassinated in cold blood. Today, the Poor People's Campaign gives me that hope, gives me that faith that God has not forsaken the United States of America, that through action, through moral fusion organizing, there is hope. 1800 years ago, Shimon ben Zoma declared that the most important verse in the Bible is that we are all created in the image of God. Every human being has dignity, everybody has a right to live, and every voice deserves to be heard. Democracy is when we come together in a perpetual encounter to solve our problems and create a better world. Democracy is an all-inclusive covenantal relationship where we hear each other and honor the dignity of every voice and every vote. Anti-voter laws are an attack on the spark of the divine that resides in every human heart. The filibuster cancels the voice of everybody across the country who voted for their senator to do the work of public service. It makes our democracy a cruel, members-only country club where the basic needs of the workers are not heard. 2,000 years ago, Hillel declared that the most important verse in the Bible is to love your neighbor as yourself, the golden rule. But when anti-voter laws keep us from hearing each other, when you and your neighbor can't vote, when even the Senate can't vote because of the filibuster, we end up following the wrong golden rule. In the inevitable and official indifference that follows suppressing votes, we are not governed by love your neighbor like you love yourself. We are governed by the idolatrous golden rule. The guy with the gold makes the rules, and those without the money to speak end up suffering. About 80 years ago, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan declared that the most important verse in the Bible is a line from the prophet Zechariah. Not by might and not by force, but through spirit alone shall we all live in peace. Only through democracy can we win democracy. We are hard at work here in Pennsylvania organizing toward democracy. In November 2019, we passed vote by mail through our GOP legislature to be signed into law by our Democratic governor. And then in November 2020, some members of that same legislature tried to cancel and silence our mail-in ballots. And just this morning, there was yet another push for an anti-voter voter ID law in Harrisburg. We need to end the filibuster in the U.S. Senate because we here in Pennsylvania need national help. We need a federal intervention on voting rights. The Senate needs to end the filibuster, stop suppressing its own vote, and let itself vote so that we can all vote. Our democracy needs to honor every single person. We need to love and serve each other and not bow down to big money interests. And through moral fusion organizing and spirit, may we all live in peace.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Rabbi Pollack and Hari. The next voices will be that of the Reverend Jimmy Hawkins, Director of the Presbyterian Church USA Office of Public Witness, and the Reverend Dr. Beth Johnson, one of our faith leaders from Southern California. Reverend Hawkins. Thank you on mute, Reverend Hawkins. Yeah.
Thank you. I am grateful for this opportunity to join with the Poor People's Campaign to be a prophetic voice in the fight for social justice and human rights, and against the ways the filibuster is used to block progressive legislation, especially when it comes to a living wage and voting rights. For you cannot filibuster a living wage. In our 2010 Living Through Economic Crisis statement, the Presbyterian Church declared, and I quote, "When economic conditions have not been just, the church has spoken out forcefully. The Social Creed of 1908 denounced the appalling conditions of the working poor and demanded a living wage, safe working conditions, the right of all people to self-maintenance, and the abatement of poverty. The 208th General Assembly in 1996 denounced the very existence of poverty as intolerable. The church affirms that people must have the opportunity to participate in economic decisions that will impact them. Thus, the church has long endorsed the right of all workers to choose to organize for collective bargaining. We as Christians are called to envision a new economic paradigm, a new way of incorporating biblical values into economic life. We do not work to earn money for social status. Rather, we work to help our neighbors and give glory to God. We do not see wealth as a reward and a license to consume, but as a social responsibility. Therefore, we proclaim that you cannot filibuster voting rights, especially in light of the voter suppression in the state of Georgia, which is contrary to the teachings of our faith. And through our 2008 Social Witness Policy Statement, Lift Every Voice, we call for a constitutional amendment to guarantee every American citizen the right to vote, national and universal voter registration, voting by mail, early voting, strengthening absentee ballot voting, greater accessibility for the disabled and minority language voters, to create a national paid holiday for voting, enforcement of the Voting Rights Act, the rejection of voter ID requirements. We are here as a people, as a denomination, as people of faith, to stand with the Poor People's Campaign in this fight to make America the country God intends it to be, a place where people are paid fairly and allowed to vote justly. Thank you.
Friends, it is good to be together this day as we gather, some of us in person, others across space and time for this Moral Mondays, to witness to the need for just and moral policies to guide our governance. Unitarian Universalism affirms the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and to working to dismantle white supremacy and build a beloved community. These principles guide us, and love calls us. In the spirit of the Reverend James Reeb and Viola Liuzzo, Unitarian Universalists who were killed while fighting for voting rights, we are called by love to show up and to speak up for voting protections. We will not let up. Love calls us to reform a system of filibuster designed to obstruct just and moral policies. We will not let up. Love calls us to show up, to speak up for living wages. We cannot rest while our siblings toil in a system designed to foster income inequality. We will not let up. In this interdependent web, none of us is free unless all of us are free. This is why Unitarian Universalists answer the call of love with the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival in fighting for just and moral policies. We will not let up. We will build this fusion movement together, and together we will see just and moral policies enacted. Beloveds, we will not let up.
Thank you, Reverend Hawkins, and thank you, Reverend Dr. Johnson. Now, the next voices you will hear is that of Rabbi Sharon Brous, Senior and Founding Rabbi of Akar, and Senior Bishop Lawrence Reddick, Chief Operating Officer of Christian Methodist Episcopal Church.
Thank you so much, Reverend Brown, and thank you, Reverend Theoharis and Bishop Barber, and colleagues and friends from around the country. I'm so honored to be with all of you today. I want to share that at 4:30 this morning, I was awakened out of bed with a start. I live in Los Angeles, and there was a pretty sizable series of earthquakes that struck in the middle of the night. So I jumped out of bed and I ran to check on my kids while the whole house felt like it was shaking off of its foundation. I've lived here in this city for about 20 years, but I'm an East Coaster born and bred, so I'm still not used to earthquakes. And yet when the tremors started to hit early this morning, I realized that they felt strangely familiar to me because, in fact, we've been living through tremors far more violent and dangerous than the ones that we experienced last night for the last several years now. Over the course now of several years, we've been receiving these cascading crises that have been leaving us all feeling not only tired and dispirited, but also disoriented and knocked off course. I think actually that we are living through a time of tectonic shift, a time in which the ground beneath our feet is stirring with a kind of growing wakefulness to the calamity of what it means to live in a home that has been built on a rotten foundation, a foundation of racial injustice and violence, with systems running all aspects of our lives that were designed to perpetuate those injustices. Our nation is trembling right now with the growing awareness of the heretical misread of our religious traditions, driven not by love of God and country, but by worship of power, that leads to the kind of brazen abuses of power that we're witnessing in the voter suppression legislations in Georgia and Texas and states all around the country. The country is awake now, finally awake to the mechanisms of fear and division that led to the kind of violence and brutality on trial in Minneapolis last week and this week, revealing to the nation and finally to the world the failures of those systems which were designed to ostracize, to criminalize, and to dehumanize Black people and people of color. Now, in LA, some people are lucky enough to sleep through those nighttime quakes. But sometimes the tremors are so violent, they're so profound that everybody wakes up. And it strikes me that the tremors that are shaking our nation today are so rupturous. They're shaking everyone awake. In the face of the earthquake shaking our nation, we have the moral obligation today to pick up the broken shards and to build something new together, something different, something more deliberate, more intentional. We have the opportunity, the moral obligation amidst the rupture of our time to imagine and then to build a society that truly centers justice, equity, and human dignity, one that refuses to cower behind the filibuster and gerrymandering and other relics of Jim Crow and other manipulations that are cynically playing themselves out in this country in order to maintain power in the hands of the few at the expense of the many. Instead, we're called today to build a new foundation for our democracy, a truly just and loving society rooted in the knowledge that all of our liberation is tied up in one another. There is no sleeping through this earthquake. The epicenter of the earthquake may be in Washington, D.C., but the magnitude is so great that the tremors are reaching every city, every district, every state in our nation. It is our most fervent, faith-filled commitment to obliterate the filibuster and all systems that have maintained and centered white supremacy for generations, and then to come together to dream daringly of what could be. The very first and most important thing we learn about human beings in the Hebrew Bible is Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzelmo, b'tzelem Elohim bara'oto. All people are created in the image of the Holy One, thereby possessing innate dignity and inestimable worth. I ask God to help us hold this idea at the forefront, not only of our theological musings, but also our public policy. It's time to end the filibuster, to end voter suppression, to lay to rest, finally, the heresy of white supremacy in all its forms, and to imagine and manifest a democracy in which every single person is truly treated as an image of the Holy One, held with dignity, with grace, and with love.
Thank you, Rabbi Brous. And now to you, Senior Bishop Lawrence Reddick.
Thank you, Reverend Brown. Today I speak for the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, or the CME Church, founded by formerly enslaved African Americans in Tennessee just 7 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Considering the written perspectives of those who founded this church, the CME Church, then identified as the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church in America. The church was morally and institutionally committed to human rights for all and to the enrichment of people's lives, educationally, economically, and socially. Several statements and actions rendered either by our top legislative body, the General Conference, or by our executives, the College of Bishops, addressed the issues of living wages and the right to vote. The openness of our churches in the South to mass meetings during the civil rights era is indicative of our commitment to voting rights. Our primary moral official statement, the Social Creed, adopted in the 60s and revised over time, states, quote, "The concern of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church for the social well-being of humankind springs from the act of God in Christ as revealed in the gospel, and from the life and witness of John Wesley and other leaders of Methodism who ministered to the physical, intellectual, and social needs of people to whom they preached a gospel of personal redemption. For us, then, three things. First, the social creed speaks directly to our working for betterment for economic life, wages, and working conditions. Second, by our actions in support of Get Out the Vote campaigns, we have shown that we are in support of voting rights, including restoring voting rights to formerly incarcerated persons whose sentences are ended. And third, we are aware of how the filibuster has been used by racists and others in the nation's history to frustrate and negate the push for actions which work for equality. And with that awareness, the CME Church's College of Bishops officially supports the Moral Monday movement being led by Bishop Barber and the Poor People's Campaign. Please go to the website and write your senators. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Browse and my classmate, Bishop Lawrence Reddick, Senior Bishop of the CME Church. Thank you all for being with us today. And as we near the conclusion of this program, just a word of appreciation, all of you joining us. Special word of appreciation, Reverend Rob Stevens and Reverend Casimir Brown, Dr. Adam Barnes, for leading this effort today, Zilla Wesley in DC, and our friends at National City Christian Church in Washington for making this day happen. Our last two speakers, the Reverend Carolyn Foster, ordained deacon in the Episcopal Church, and one of our leaders in the Poor People's Campaign in Alabama, and our friend and sister, and my general minister and president, the Reverend Terry Howard Owens of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. So Reverend Foster, and then the Reverend Terry Howard Owens.
Thank you, Pastor Jackson. I wonder what is wrong with our elected leaders when they refuse to see or even acknowledge the pain and suffering of people they were elected to serve. Why do they turn their faces away when confronted with poverty realities facing 140 million people in this country? Why do they distort the truth, mislead the multitude, and blame the poor for their troubles? This country is in a moral crisis. When over 253 bills in states right now are proposed to restrict voting rights and accessibility, when ensuring that a working person can make a living wage becomes an issue of contention, when tactics like a filibuster obstructs and stonewalls critical issues that are vital to the well-being of people who are poor and low wealth, it becomes necessary for people of faith and moral conscience to come together, raise our collective voices, and make some holy trouble. We must, by word and example, bring our moral power to bear as we raise up the voices and the power of poor people to make what Dr. King said, the power structure of this nation say yes when they may be desirous to say no. Like the persistent widows seeking justice from an unjust judge in the parable from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 18, we must make our elected leaders hear us, see us, and give us that for which we are entitled in this country, and that is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We do not have fullness of life when we cannot feed our families. We do not have liberty when our right to vote is under attack. We cannot pursue happiness when 140 million people in the wealthiest country in the world are poor and low wealth. We are strong, we are constant, and we come with an authority greater than ourselves. And we are not going anywhere. We are putting our elected leaders on notice. We demand a safer, stronger, and more compassionate approach to policy issues that impact the poor, which is at the heart of all of our faith traditions. We demand an end to obstructionist tactics like the immoral filibuster that blocks forward progress. We demand that everybody is treated with dignity and respect in all policy decisions. We believe everybody should be in and nobody out. We know what is right and what is moral, and that is to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with one another. We must be truthful about the suffering in our country and address the systemic and policy issues that are creating that suffering. We demand to be seen, to be heard, and to be respected by our elected officials. We cannot continue, or they cannot continue to turn their faces away from us. The time is now for just policy solutions to heal the suffering in our country. These are moral issues. Let it be so now. And I encourage everyone to go to the website and send those letters to your senators now.
Thank you, Reverend Foster. Reverend Owens.
Thank you, my brother, for this invitation to speak on this most important topic. As a Christian minister, I understand the work of justice as an active response to the commandment of Jesus to love our neighbor as ourselves. And right now, we need bold, swift, and courageous action to solve the problems in this country. As Dr. King said, 53 years ago yesterday, on the night of April 3rd, the night before he was assassinated, as he spoke to the nation about poverty, he said, we have the tools. We have the resources. What we need is the will. We are all diminished when any one of us is denied basic resources to sustain and flourish as human beings. We all need food, a living wage to provide that food, decent housing, healthcare, education that's not dependent on a zip code, the right to vote, the most precious right that ensures this democracy. And we all are endowed with those particular inalienable rights that the founders spoke of: life, liberty, and I believe not just the pursuit of happiness, but the ability to create a society in which all have enough. So when our citizenship is being threatened by bills that suppress the freedom of the people to cast their votes, and when our elected officials, our elected senators, institute rules like the filibuster that keep those very elected officials accountable to us, accountable to the people, from presenting any case for the passage of just laws, our humanity is insulted and our democracy is compromised. The filibuster is a tool that has been used to obstruct open debate necessary for the deliberation of and the dismantling of systemic injustice in this country. We cannot solve our problems unless we can understand and openly discuss the right paths to solving those problems. And so we have to demand that our elected officials, our senators, honor the dignity and humanity of all of our citizens by hearing every voice and allowing every case to be presented on the floor. As Dr. King said, we have the tools. We have the resources. What we need is the will. So let us summon the courage and the will to end any process that obstructs open deliberation, to end poverty, to ensure the right to vote, to remove barriers to justice, even within our own elected bodies. Let us truly be the people. Let us work for that more perfect union. Let us be the democracy we say we are. I encourage you to go to the website to contact your elected officials and demand that they show not only the courage, but that they exercise the will to ensure that the processes of our democracy will allow free and open deliberation for just laws that will dismantle so many systems of oppression in this country.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Carolyn Foster. Thank you, Reverend Terry Hord Owens. We are here as a fusion movement, and you've heard it loud and clear that we're not going to allow the filibuster to block democracy. We are not going to allow it to block our voting rights. We're not going to allow it to block our living wages. We're not going to allow it to block our voice, which is now we encourage you all to reach out to your senators, call them, send that call to conscience to your senators so they can hear our voices. We invite you to come back here next week for our next Moral Monday. And now we're going to end with a sound calling of Don't Filibuster Our Democracy, but it's a theomusicology. Sorry, that's not the name. Our theomusicology is, oh my goodness, I forgot. Rob?
Which side are you on?
Thank you. Which side are you on? Moses told us, and that was a great prompt. So which side are you on? We're on the side of not filibustering democracy. Right. Forward together, not one step back.
Amen.
Amen.
Today we face our future, and there ain't no neutral ground. You're either wide awake or fast asleep. Climate crisis is going down. Which side are you on now? Which side are you on? Which side are you on now? Which side are you on? In the Capitol, the governor's bosses, the polluters write the law. The lobbyists love their pocket while they serve corruption's call. Now the halls of power won't right to work, their union busted lies. We need working folks in solidarity and our labor organized. Which side are you on now? Which side are you on? Which side are you on now? Which side are you on? Trees up in the mountains, brave resistors make their stand to defend our planet's future, protect our water, air, and land. The judge lays down fines, $500 every day, while the richest nation in history, politicians look away. Which side are you on now? Which side are you on? Which side are you on now? Which side are you on? There's a choice we gotta make. A just transition and a Green New Deal is the only road to take. Which side are you on now? Which side are you on? Which side are you on now? Which side are you on? Which side? Which side are you on now? Which side are you on? Which side are you on now? Which side are you on? Which side? Which side?